Right now on Morning News Now, on the defensive, President Trump standing by National Security Advisor Michael Waltz after that stunning leak of war plans shared in a group chat that inadvertently included a journalist.
I take responsibility. I built the group.
No, I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best.
Now, the Trump administration downplaying the incident while Democrats demand all the messages be released.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then if there's no classified material, share it with the committee.
We have team coverage with the investigation, the fallout, and what happens next. Also this morning, a cost-cutting controversy now potentially impacting retirees as Elon Musk's DOGE takes aim at the Social Security Administration. We'll bring you the latest on the worry it's causing recipients. Plus, exposure concerns, a warning from health officials in D.C. about a growing measles outbreak after they say a patient took a train while infected with the highly contagious disease. What you need to know to stay healthy. And move over Netflix. A majority of movie lovers say they plan to hit the theaters more this year. We'll get a sneak peek at some of the summer blockbusters set to give the box office a big boost. Some serious movies coming out this summer.
Exactly. I feel like a lot of franchises are in our future this year coming up this summer. All right, good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to begin our show this morning at the White House. Top Trump administration officials are coming under intense criticism for discussing those Yemen war plans in a group chat that inadvertently included the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. His name's Jeffrey Goldberg.
President Trump and his allies are downplaying the leak, saying there was no classified material in those texts. But lawmakers are demanding an investigation into the incident. Some Democrats are calling on the president to fire the officials involved. Among those under pressure is National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. He was the one who accidentally added Goldberg to the group chat. The president told NBC News that Waltz, quote, learned a lesson and he's a good man. In an interview with Fox News yesterday, Waltz said he took responsibility for what happened.
It's embarrassing, yes. We're going to get to the bottom of it. I just talked to Elon on the way here. We've got the best technical minds looking at how this happened. But I can tell you for 100%, I don't know this guy. I know him by his horrible reputation. Look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
We've got a team standing by to talk about this and more. We start things off with NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. Aaron, good morning. So what else are we hearing from the president about this? We know he likes to take the temperature of the media coverage. Is he still fully standing behind Mike Waltz this morning?
100% behind Mike Waltz and the rest of his national security team, to include the Secretary of Defense as well as the directors of national intelligence and the CIA who testified on Capitol Hill yesterday. President Trump really, and I think the entire administration, has been trying to sort of shift the focus of this incident more to the outcome, what happened to the Houthis who were subject to this airstrike that was the point of this conversation that happened on the Signal messaging app, rather than focusing on what really has turned into a fiasco for this administration in terms of looking at how this sensitive information, which the president says was not classified, that's his understanding, the sensitive information was able to get out there to the general public in the way that it has at this point. I want you to hear a little bit more of what the president himself had to say about this incident and accountability.
There's no classified information, as I understand it. I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best. It's equipment and technology that's not perfect, and probably he won't be using it again, at least not in the very near future.
We also heard Mike Waltz, the president's national security advisor, say again in that interview you showed a few seconds ago that there was no classified information in this conversation. He also went so far as to say that he would prefer the Atlantic not release more details, not release more contents of that chat, saying that the people who were supposed to be there believed that they were having a confidential exchange of policy ideas and exchange of information about some of the actions that the administration would be taking, Joe and Savannah.
So, Aaron, we've mentioned lawmakers are demanding answers, some demanding repercussions. Is the White House likely to heed calls, at least for any type of investigation, or take any kind of meaningful action?
We saw really aggressive back and forth from Democrats on Capitol Hill yesterday as they were questioning the the Director of National Intelligence and the CIA Director. This was supposed to be a hearing about really a different topic, but so much of it focused on this Signal chat conversation and the fact that the information there was able to get out to someone in the public. We know that there is at least one senator who's calling for Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, and Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, to resign. As far as an investigation goes, the Trump administration has not been using the word investigation. They have said, the president has said, the press secretary has said that they are looking into this incident, suggesting that Elon Musk and his DOGE team, these are technical experts who would be looking into how this person was added to the group chat, that also the National Security Council and the White House counsel's office, the lawyers at the White House, are also looking into this incident. And there seems to be consensus, Joe and Savannah, that they don't want to see this happen again.
Aaron, real quick while we have you, we wanted to ask about an executive order the president signed yesterday. It's a directive that requires people to prove their citizenship when they register to vote. This is certainly going to face challenges in court, but how could it impact our elections?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is going to face challenges in court, Joe. This is something also that would represent really a major change in how elections are carried out in this country. The order orders the Election Assistance Commission to redo voter registration forms and require that voters prove their citizenship in order to register to vote. It also makes some changes to mail-in ballot deadlines and to election equipment in some instances. And the administration says that this is really designed to prevent non-citizens from being able to vote, which there's no evidence that that happens in significant numbers. When people register to vote, they do have to swear on that form that they are both citizens and that they are eligible to vote. The expectation from some legal experts is that, Joe and Savannah, this will end up in the courts because elections are primarily run, if you will, by Congress and the states. The president doesn't necessarily have any authority or power over elections and how they're carried out.
All right, Aaron Gilchrist, thank you so much.
Well, senior Trump national security officials are likely to face tough questions today about that group chat leak at a House hearing.
Yeah, already yesterday, top intelligence officials stonewalled and shifted blame as they were grilled by Democratic senators. It was part of an annual hearing about global threats, but that hearing was overshadowed by the security breach. Democrats pressed CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard for answers over their participation in the now leaked chat.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
A national
Hold on.
No, you
Let me
hold
answer.
on. No, Director Ratcliffe, I asked you a yes or no question, and now you hold on. A national political reporter
You can characterize it how you want.
Was made privy
The White
to
House
sensitive
has made
information
clear
about
that there
imminent
was an
military
inadvertent
operations against a
mistake,
foreign terrorist
an inadvertent
organization.
mistake.
There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error. And by the way, we will get the full transcript of this chain, and your testimony will be measured carefully against its content.
For more, let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. Julie, good morning. So clearly things got heated at yesterday's hearing. What did senators try to dig into with their questions?
Yeah, it got super intense during that hearing. Remember, there are two parts to the worldwide threat hearing, the one that the public sees and then a closed session. And that is where most Republicans reserve their concerns and questions, of which there are many behind the scenes, to these national security and top defense officials that testified before this hearing. Now, what you did say play out in public was mostly from Democrats. You saw Jon Ossoff of Georgia kind of questioning John Ratcliffe there in that hearing. But you also heard many Democrats try to get to the bottom of what happened in the Signal chat, whether the information was classified or not. They kept getting mixed answers from Tulsi Gabbard to John Ratcliffe to the other folks in that room. And Mark Warner, who was the top Democrat on that panel, really tried to drill down on this because he and many other Democrats and Republicans, by the way, were just stunned that this happened a mere 18 hours before this scheduled hearing was set to take place. Listen to this.
If this was a rank and file intelligence officer who did this kind of careless behavior, what would you do with them?
Senator, I'll reiterate that there was no classified material that was shared in that
And
signal.
if there's no classified in materials, share. And then if there's no classified materials, then you can't even answer the question whether you won the chat.
They got extremely frustrated in this hearing as they kind of heard different things from all of the witnesses present, and they obviously got even more during that closed session afterwards.
So, Julia, what are congressional Democrats planning to do to try to get some answers about whether any classified information was in these texts and who was ultimately responsible? And is there any sign that any Republicans want to play ball and also look into this more?
Well, Republicans playing ball is pretty key here because Democrats are in the minority in the House and the Senate, of course, and so they don't have much power when it comes to getting to the bottom of this. There is a new letter out this morning from the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and top Democrats to President Trump expressing their anger and frustration at this, wanting to get to the bottom of this situation. But when you talk about Republicans, the top Republican in the Senate, John Thune, yesterday said that he expects some of his committees, the Senate Armed Services Committee, for example, who could call in Pete Hegseth, who is the Defense Secretary who was on that chain, that signal chat before the panel. He said that his committees will be holding hearings, will be trying to get to the bottom of this. It just depends how much the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue at the White House actually wants them to. I asked a number of Republicans yesterday if they want to see the full signal file, if they want to perhaps get some of these officials on the phone or in the room. They said that they do want to do so. They want to see everything. But of course, we'll see exactly what happens, whether it's a public hearing, whether it's a conversation or a hand slap that happens in private. That still remains to be seen. But as you mentioned, those officials will be back on the Hill today, testifying before the House Intelligence Committee this time.
Julie, before we let you go, one other quick thing we want to ask you about this battle that's brewing between Republicans and federal judges. This is these judges who have issued rulings blocking parts of President Trump's agenda, like, for example, the one we've been talking a lot about with immigration, this current hold on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. House Speaker Mike Johnson, he made some pretty aggressive comments yesterday floating the idea of eliminating federal courts. Let's play some of that.
We do have authority over the federal courts, as you know. We can eliminate an entire district court. We have power funding over the courts and all these other things. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and Congress is going to act. So stay tuned for that.
So, Julie, what are Republicans actually exploring here as they try to push their agenda past these judges and courts?
Yeah, House Speaker Mike Johnson threatening with the power of the purse. Of course, Congress does control the federal spending. They can, in theory, shutter an entire district court. But what's more likely to happen here is that the House will take up a series of bills, including Darrell Issas, who is a congressman from California, who essentially wants to neutralize or limit the power that district judges have over injunctions, meaning pausing any executive orders that come down from the Trump administration, of which there have been many over the last 2 months. Those pauses and stays as the courts review those actions further. The thing is, Elon Musk and some in the party want them to do more. He, remember, threw money behind members of Congress who floated impeaching these judges. That's probably not going to happen, but obviously Republicans want to be caught trying.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you very much.
Let's return to our top story, the ongoing fallout from that group chat leak with NBC News national security analyst Clint Waltz. Clint, good to have you with us. So let's just ask about this Signal messaging app that was used for the conversation. The president said yesterday a lot of people in the government and the military use it. Should it be used for these types of conversations? I mean, it's encrypted, but just how secure is it?
Yeah, a couple of things with that. They should not be using it, largely because it's on their personal phones. That would be the normal course of action. U.S. government generally doesn't put it on devices. They may in certain circumstances, but that is yet to be seen. I think the second part of it is Signal is known as one of the better applications for securing communication. You might even remember DHS, CISA, and some others put out a warning last fall regarding Chinese hacking, and they actually said use encrypted applications such as Signal. That being said, it's a private company app. It's not controlled by the government. The U.S. government should always want control over all of its communications and have authority over all of that infrastructure. So they're relying on a third party that likely hasn't been vetted in the way most would for the U.S. government, the U.S. intelligence community in particular.
And Clint, you mentioned it's not on a government device because it can't be downloaded there and it's on personal phones. Why is that a concern? Why is that less secure?
It's less secure mostly for the unknown. You don't know where it is secured or how it is secured. You're basically going to a third party without proper vetting, hoping that it is more secure. At the same point, there have been warnings issued both in the U.S. government and around the world that foreign intelligence services do target the Signal application. They do that because they know it is a secure application and many people are trying to use it. So if you're a Russian, Iranian, Chinese, or other hacker group, that is a ripe target to go after because you would assume that very high-level people may be with confidential conversations, not just in government, but law firms, corporations. They would also be using it that's a ripe field to get into if you can go and pick into those accounts.
Clint, what kind of problems could a leak like this have, not just on intelligence sharing within the government, but with our foreign allies, not to mention our foes, now that they know these conversations are happening at the highest levels on Signal?
Two dimensions to classified information. One, what is the classification level, which we always talk about, secret, top secret, and even beyond. But the second part is really how is it distributed? Information is only as secure as the distribution system it's on. When you see this, if you're an ally working with the United States, even if you're a source, maybe they're providing that information, whether there's labels on it or not, when sensitive information like that gets out into the open, everyone loses trust, and loss of trust equals loss of sharing. Loss of sharing equals lack of security. So that entire pendulum, those steps down, all impact U.S. government, U.S. intel community, and overall U.S. people in terms of their protection.
All right, Clint Watts. Clint, thank you so much.
Let's stay on Capitol Hill. The future of Social Security was a hot topic yesterday as the man tapped by President Trump to run the agency was pressed on the administration's plans. While he says there won't be any cuts to benefits, many Americans are still anxious about the program's future. NBC News correspondent, Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles has the story.
Denise Parashak is a 70-year-old retired nurse from Pennsylvania who relies every day on her check from Social Security.
It's just something that we always counted on.
She's one of millions of Americans who paid into the system and now worries about the impact of potential changes from President Trump and Elon Musk.
Just looking at being able to provide 3 basic meals for ourselves, because if Social Security were eliminated, I mean, it's just, I can't even think about how terrible that would be.
Musk has openly attacked Social Security.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Enter Frank Bisignano, the former CEO of the financial services company Fiserv, tapped by Trump to run the program, promising no one's benefits will be impacted despite planned staffing cuts and office closures.
Are you willing to commit right now that you will put enough people back to work so they can do the job of delivering the benefits that Americans earned?
I will commit,
yes or no?
I will commit to have the right staffing to get the job done.
Congressional Republicans are on a mission to cut as much as $2 trillion in federal spending, a task that won't be easy without impacting programs like Social Security. Some expressing their fears at fiery town halls across America.
100% untrue.
Republicans insist they plan to focus on potential waste, fraud, and abuse and hope to automate some services.
I don't think there's a business in the private sector that's probably operating with an antiquated type of IT system that government agencies are. You know, why can't we upgrade those?
But for seniors like Denise, abrupt, tech-savvy changes could be a huge challenge.
Social Security and Medicare should never be on the chopping block at all.
And there are already reports of the agency's website crashing and long waits for people seeking help on the phone. A recent survey shows that 72% of Americans are concerned that Social Security will run out of funding in their lifetime.
Ryan, thank you. Vice President J.D. Vance says he is now planning to join his wife on her trip to Greenland later this week. Usha Vance had planned to travel to the Danish territory on a cultural visit before her husband announced his plans. The couple will now visit the U.S. Space Force base there to get a briefing on Arctic security issues. The move is perceived by some as a major escalation in President Trump's intentions to have Greenland become part of the United States. Officials in Greenland have called the visit disrespectful.
Well, West Virginia is now the first state to completely ban foods that contain certain artificial food dyes over health concerns. The ban will take place in schools first beginning this year and then across the state in 2028. NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello has the details.
They're found in everything from chips and candies to baked goods, breakfast cereals, fruit juices, even medications. For decades, researchers have warned that artificial dyes can lead to serious behavioral issues in children. While not universally accepted, West Virginia has now become the first state to ban 7 artificial dyes and 2 preservatives. In schools this year, statewide in 2028, the governor writing West Virginia ranks at the bottom of many public health metrics, which is why there's no better place to lead the Make America Healthy Again mission. Marissa Salon is now weaning her 6-year-old off artificial dyes.
I would see him bouncing off the walls and just acting way out of his character, throwing huge temper tantrums. and just not being able to control himself and being able to calm down after he would eat those foods.
The EU, Australia, and Japan already ban or regulate artificial dyes. The FDA banned red dye number 3 in January. A food industry trade group says West Virginians will have less access to affordable, nutritious, and convenient food and beverage choices. Meanwhile, more than 20 other states are considering similar bans. California already bans dyes in school meals. NYU nutrition expert Marion Nessel.
These dyes are there for cosmetic purposes. They don't have a health or a safety purpose. And public health advocates have wanted to get rid of them for decades.
Researchers say the evidence isn't concrete because it is unethical to test something on children when you believe it will likely hurt them. Back to you.
All right, Tom, thank you so much.
Texas could see some flooding tonight with storms coming in from the Gulf. For more details, let's take a look at your morning news now weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman's with us. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, this is going to be a big story over the next several days. We have a developing situation where we could see up to 15 inches of rain in parts of southern Texas. And that's because we have subtropical moisture moving in. So flood alerts already in place. We have a flood watch for Corpus Christi. That's sort of going to be the bullseye of where we're going to see some of this really heavy rain. Right now, things are looking okay. We're going to start to see this rain filling in, especially later on this evening, and be really heavy on Thursday with rainfall rates of 2-3 inches per hour. So this is what it looks like, that heavy rain developing across southern Texas, especially this evening. And we could see record rainfall amounts at Corpus Christi. Again, that will be the bullseye. Lots of reds and oranges and yellows indicating that really heavy rainfall. And this is Thursday. The rain and storms continue. That's going to raise the flood risk. We could have flash flooding. We have a moderate risk in spots and could see hourly rainfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. Generally, we'll see 4 to 8 inches of rain, but could see 10, even 15 inches in some spots. Where you see that darker red, that's going to be the bullseye right off the Gulf where it's streaming right onto the coast. That's one big story. The second big story is rain, snow, and storms in the Pacific Northwest. We have a really rare event today where we could see a tornado, a brief tornado in portions of the Pacific Northwest. And certainly seeing thunderstorms are likely. So as we go throughout time here, we'll see this big cyclone move on shore. It's going to bring the chance for really heavy rain. That's going to continue into tomorrow as well, bringing the chance of flooding there. But 7 million people at risk from Seattle to Portland, Eugene. We don't see this often where we could see hail 2 inches or larger with any of these storms, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, and could see a brief tornado or two. Heavy rainfall, especially along the coast from Seattle to Medford down to Eureka, where you see those darker colors. That's where we're expecting the highest amounts of rain. And we're going to see a lot of snow in some spots, too. The highest mountains could see 8 inches of snow in some spots. So the third big story, lots of weather happening today. We do have that warmth holding on, record-breaking heat across the west into the plains. 91 degrees today in Henderson, Nevada. That's 17 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. We broke some records yesterday. We broke some records on Monday. We'll do that once again today. And you guys, we're going to see 90 degrees in Tucson. That is 12 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. Also warm in the plains and into the southeast. Back to you.
71 in Seattle. That's like June, July weather there.
I know. Isn't it crazy?
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Well, it was exactly 1 year ago this morning that a cargo ship slammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, killing 6 people as it collapsed into the water below. You can see that moment of impact right here. The crew says they lost the ability to steer that massive container ship after losing power as it was leaving the port of Baltimore.
Crews are now building a new bridge as the NTSB's investigation goes on. That probe is already raising questions about possible issues with the bridge before the deadly incident. NBC News correspondent Jay Gray joins us now from Baltimore with a closer look. Jay, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning to you. As the sun comes up, you can see just behind us here the remnants of the Key Bridge, what's left from that tragedy a year ago. A constant reminder for people who live and work here. NTSB investigators say they expect to file a full report on the crash this fall, but they are warning, as you talk about, Joe, that there were issues with the Key Bridge before the tragedy. A lack of required inspections, the agency says, would have alerted operators to the collapse risk that was nearly 30 times the acceptable threshold for critical and essential bridges here in the U.S. As the cargo ship Dolly slams into a pier supporting the Key Bridge.
The bridge is gone. Holy.
It rips apart not only the massive structure, but the lives of 6 families. 6 members of a road crew killed as the bridge suddenly collapsed beneath them.
To the victims of this tragedy and their loved ones, all of our hearts are broken. We feel your loss. We're thinking of you, and we will always be thinking of you.
It took more than 3 months to pull the ship from the scene and the wreckage from the water, crippling one of the busiest shipping lanes in the United States. And now, a year later, a shocking report from the NTSB claiming Maryland authorities ignored national guidelines calling for vulnerability assessments on the bridge.
Had they done that, the collapse could have been prevented.
The Maryland Transportation Authority, responding to that report, says the tragedy is, quote, the sole fault of the Dolly and the gross negligence of her owners and operators who put profits ahead of safety. As crews build a new bridge, Maryland's governor stresses it will be safe.
We are going to make sure that we are going to get this bridge built on time and on budget, and it is going to make sure that it leads up to all industry standards on safety.
The rebuild has a target completion date of 2028 at a cost of just under $2 billion. You know, right now, land and water surveys are continuing. They're ongoing here at the site. Joe, Savannah, they expect to really begin construction in earnest sometime by the end of the year.
All right, Jay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, exposure concerns. Health officials warning that a growing measles outbreak in Texas may have spread to the East Coast. We're going to bring you the latest.
But first, though, after the break, progress toward peace. The partial ceasefire deal just reached between Russia and Ukraine. We'll be right back. We are back with a significant development towards negotiating peace in the Ukraine-Russia war. Russia and Ukraine have agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea, the Trump administration said Tuesday, following negotiations mediated by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
In a statement, the White House said the agreement ensures safe navigation and eliminates the use of force in the Black Sea. Russia and Ukraine also agreed to cease attacks on energy infrastructure.
NBC News International correspondent Kelly Kobiea joins us now from London with the latest here. Kelly, good morning. So walk us through the key conditions in the ceasefire agreement at this point.
Yeah, Joe and Savannah, details of the deal haven't been released, but the White House mediator spent days meeting separately with both sides in Saudi Arabia and then released 2 separate statements on the talks rather than details of the deal itself. One for Ukraine, one for Russia. They say that both broadly agreed to the deal, but with caveats. The U.S. promising to lift restrictions imposed on Russian agricultural exports when the war began, while committing to an exchange of prisoners for Ukraine, including the return of forcibly transferred Ukrainian children, as well as a framework to pause attacks going forward, a full ceasefire going forward. But overnight, there were many attacks on Ukraine, and Russia also claiming that Ukraine sent attack drones its way as well. Savannah and Joe.
So, Kelly, even though this is a big step toward trying to end the 3-year-long war, this is far from the full peace that we know President Trump and so many others are pushing for. What more can you tell us about the administration's role now moving forward and what it is they want to see?
Well, President Trump said the discussions are going well, but he went a little bit further than that as well. He said sort of remaining cautious about a full ceasefire. The president said that Russia could be dragging their feet. Both Moscow and Kyiv agreed in principle to a limited 30-day ceasefire last week on energy facilities, energy infrastructure. But both sides are still launching drone and rocket attacks, as I mentioned overnight. More than 100 drones sent towards several Ukrainian cities, including President Zelensky's hometown and a key port city in Ukraine that gives Ukraine access to the Black Sea. And that was just hours after the White House announced that tentative Black Sea deal. So it's not looking particularly positive this morning, Joe and Savannah.
Yeah, and even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expressing skepticism over how it's going to be implemented. He said in a news conference yesterday that there was no faith in the Russians here. What challenges do remain in fully implementing this deal or even taking it any steps further?
Well, after that statement was released, or the two separate statements were released yesterday, Russia then came out with yet another statement saying that they will not be implementing this Black Sea deal until sanctions are lifted. Sanctions against agricultural banks and other financial institutions involved in food and fertilizer trade. They want to make sure that those banks have access to the international SWIFT system for international payments. And Zelensky fired back at that, accusing Moscow of manipulation and lying because of those demands, which came after both sides thought, and the White House thought, that they had a Black Sea deal. So this is far from over. Talks will be continuing, we think.
All right, Kelly, thank you.
Now, even as the Trump administration works to negotiate peace with Russian President Putin, America's NATO allies say there has been no let-up in Russian sabotage efforts across Europe. NBC News joined a NATO fleet in the frigid Baltic Sea. It was an exclusive look inside a training mission to defend against potential Russian attacks underwater. NBC's Raf Sanchez takes you on board.
On the icy waters of the Baltic Sea, NATO warships are playing a game of cat and mouse, where the rules are murky and the stakes are high. This was a training exercise. Their real mission, stopping alleged Russian sabotage attacks on undersea cables that supply power and data to Europe. The White House says Ukraine and Russia have agreed to a ceasefire at sea as part of U.S. efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Last week, we embarked with NATO Naval Patrol Baltic Sentry.
Just to give you a sense of how complicated this waterway is, we're departing from the northern coast of Poland, a NATO ally, but just a couple of miles that way is the Russian territory of Kaliningrad. Above the surface, you have merchant vessels, you have military ships like this one, but below the water, you have those critical undersea cables.
On Christmas Day, this tanker set sail from Russia, crossing the Baltic but dragging its anchor on the seabed, slashing 4 underwater cables, according to Finland, until commandos boarded the ship and arrested the crew.
An anchor is not made to drag above over the seabed.
So, in your judgment, could this have been an accident?
Not at my ship.
Russia denies involvement, but Finland says the ship is likely part of the Shadow Fleet, merchant craft operating under orders from the Kremlin. NATO now deploying underwater drones to check cables for signs of damage. It comes as President Trump has said Europe needs to spend more on its own defense instead of relying on the U.S.
In some ways, this mission is exactly the model that the Trump administration wants. All the ships here are European.
And you feel you can still rely on the United States?
I do. I absolutely do. We are still NATO.
These uncertain waters, now the front lines of a shadowy conflict. Raf Sanchez, NBC News, the Baltic Sea.
Coming up, contagion concerns. A case of the measles now being traced to a train in D.C. What we're learning from health officials.
Plus, more proof that you are what you eat. The one group researchers say benefits most from a healthy diet. Dr. Azar is in for our weekly checkup next on Morning News Now.
We're back with the latest on the growing measles outbreak. There are now more than 420 cases nationwide, according to NBC News' count. Now, most cases are tied to this outbreak in West Texas, but travel-related infections are also emerging. Health officials in Washington, D.C. are now warning of possible exposure in the district. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz joins us with more. Hey, Liz, good morning.
Hey, Savannah, good morning. That's right. Health officials say a person with measles recently traveled on Amtrak and spent time in Union Station, in D.C. before visiting an urgent care clinic. Measles is one of the most contagious viruses in the world, and as it spreads, health experts are pleading with people to get vaccinated.
This morning, public health officials continuing to warn about the growing measles outbreak, with another infection now reported, this time in Washington, D.C., just as tourists descend on the city for cherry blossom season.
This is exactly what we would worry about, is that the measles outbreak is not going to be contained just to one community or one state.
Local officials say a person who recently traveled to the nation's capital from Minnesota became infected with measles and then traveled through several places in the city while contagious, including an Amtrak train and Union Station on March 19th, followed by an urgent care a few days later. In a statement, Amtrak saying they're reaching out directly to passengers who were on the train.
How concerned should someone be who maybe was on the Amtrak that this person was on?
If you were unvaccinated and you were riding in the car with someone who was infected and contagious with measles, you stand a very high chance of getting sick yourself.
This latest infection adding to the rising number of measles cases nationwide. By NBC News' count, so far this year, there have been 423 confirmed cases across 19 states and D.C. The biggest outbreaks in the Southwest and the majority in Texas, where 40 people have been hospitalized and one child who was unvaccinated died in February. The outbreak putting many families on edge, like Don Gibson and Carlia Suba, who have a newborn baby and toddler and recently decided to cancel an upcoming family trip to Texas.
Our youngest one's too young to get vaccinated. Our older one doesn't have his booster. So do we want to risk it? We decided the safest thing was just to keep the kids home.
According to health experts, measles is so contagious that 90% of unvaccinated people who come into contact with an infected person can contract the virus.
Now, health experts say measles symptoms include a fever, runny nose, nasal congestion, and red eye, followed by a rash. A person with the virus is generally considered contagious 4 days before the rash appears and 4 days after. The CDC says 2 doses of the measles vaccine offers lifetime protection, and the people who should most consider getting a booster are those who received immunization between 1963 and 1967. During that time, the vaccine is not considered to have been as effective. Savannah.
All right, Liz, really good info. Thank you so much.
Time now for our weekly medical checkup. First up, the risks of broken heart syndrome. New research shows it may double the chances of hospitalization for a range of health issues.
We've also got a new study that reveals how just 2 hours of exercise a week can improve health and well-being, specifically for new moms.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins us now to discuss these headlines. And while we have you here, we just saw you in that piece. I think people have a lot. It's magic. She got here very quickly. People have a lot of questions about this measles thing. It's someone who was on an Amtrak train at Union Station, then in urgent care, especially with people traveling so much in the spring and summer. When it comes to travel hubs, train stations, airports, what should people know?
Listen, if you and your family are fully vaccinated, you should really have no concerns, and there shouldn't be any limitations on your travel. If, unfortunately, you have a child under the age of 12 months who hasn't received their first vaccination, yes, you are at a higher risk and you might want to rethink. You know, the CDC actually has recommendations for individuals who are traveling internationally who have young infants. They can actually get vaccinated as young as 6 months. So that's definitely something that you can talk about with your pediatrician. But again, evidence or presumptive immunity, if you were born before 1957, if you have records of having had your MMR shot, if you can show titers that you are immune, or if you've actually been infected with measles, you're considered to be protected lifelong.
Wow. All right. Really, again, good info there. Okay, let's talk about what Joe just mentioned, our first study here about broken heart syndrome and some serious impacts here. People who have it could end up landing in the hospital. It's more likely. What do we know?
Rehospitalized. So first of all, the Takotsubo, where the name comes from, it stands for, or it means Japanese octopus trap. And the reason that it's called that is because what happens because of either physical or mental stress, you get weakening of the heart muscle, and it sort of has this like outpouching, if you will, that looks like an octopus. So that's what the syndrome actually is. And we know that it can happen after losing a loved one, et cetera. But this study specifically was interested in if you're admitted for Takotsubo, are you more likely to be readmitted? And the answer was yes. You were twice as likely than the general population for reasons like a heart attack, heart failure, stroke, and other reasons. The doctor's orders here, easier said than done. People who experience this clearly underwent a significant stress. To the best of your ability after a very stressful event, make sure you're trying relaxation techniques, and remember that this isn't permanent. But please, if you're feeling intense emotional distress after something happens, your doctors and your family should be keeping an eye out. You know, they invoked this possibly in Gene Hackman's death. That's like online chatter because he found his wife, deceased.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about eating here, which we talk about often.
Yes.
And researchers have found, this is no surprise, but with middle-aged adults, the better you eat, the better you age. Imagine that.
Right.
I have a feeling, based on our conversations, I know the answer to this next question, but what should you eat?
Yes.
What did this research find?
Let me guess, the Mediterranean diet.
Another day, another diet. Well, so what was interesting and different about this study is that we look a lot at how does diet impact your mental health? How does diet impact your cognitive health, right? Increasing risk for Alzheimer's. This was actually looking at everything and defined something called healthy aging, which means that you reach the age of 70 without any chronic disease and you're cognitively and physically and mentally intact. And they studied over 100,000 people, and they studied them for 30 years. Wow. And they looked at their diets. Now, Joe, to your point, all the diets were healthy, but this is the one that won. This is called the AHEI. It's the Alternative Healthy Eating Index. No surprise. Fruits, veggies, whole grains, nuts, legumes, healthy fats, and low in red and processed meats, added sugars, and sodium and refined grains. So, doctor's orders, it's not a one-size-fits-all. All of these healthy diets work, but you really want to try to go whole food, plant-based, avoiding ultra-processed. And that's really like the key to success. But I like how they did, they defined healthy aging and what that means. And your goal is to get to 70, pretty much almost.
You have options.
You have options. Yeah, exactly. But definitely something to work towards.
Okay, we mentioned the new moms one. Obviously tough to find any time for yourself in those first few months, but researchers did find that this mix of vigorous exercise with strength training, it was the perfect prescription for maternal health. How much, though, do you need when you're at that phase and it's tough to do anything?
So first off, I wanted to see who wrote the article. Like, was it all men or was it actually women who asked? Because like a lot of this may sound aspirational, but what they were specifically looking for is if you start to exercise, and the recommendation is within the first 12 weeks, you don't want to put it off. Being sedentary, not good postpartum. I can vouch for that, how much exercise can help. It wards off depression, anxiety, your cardiovascular health is better, pelvic floor, musculoskeletal health, and fatigue is all better. It's 120 minutes a week, that's 2 hours, spread over, 4 or 5 days, moderate to vigorous exercise as well as strength training. My doctor's orders: start gradually and spread it out. And if you have medical conditions that impede that, you're recovering from a C-section, etc. Give yourself grace. As I said, this is aspirational, but it's evidence-based. And anyone who knows that exercise can fix things, exercise can absolutely help in the postpartum period. And this is really what they're encouraging.
Both body and mind.
Body and mind, exactly.
Dr. Azar, as always, thank you so much.
Great to have you.
Coming up new this morning, a big discount brand officially sold.
Yeah, more on Dollar Tree's billion-dollar deal to offload its Family Dollar store. You're watching Morning News Now. Welcome back. Discount giant Family Dollar is up for sale for a little bit more than $1.
Yeah, a lot more than $1. CNBC's Savannah now has that and some other dollar sign headlines. Savannah, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Savannah. Good Wednesday morning to you. Yeah, definitely for more than $1. So, yeah, Dollar Tree striking a deal today to sell its Family Dollar business to a pair of private equity firms for about $1 billion. Now, Dollar Tree and Family Dollar are known for selling discount merchandise, but they do serve different customers. Now, Dollar Tree stores are located mostly in the suburbs, catering to middle-income consumers looking for party supplies and crafts. Family Dollar stores are largely found in urban areas, selling groceries, cleaning products, and other essentials at various price points. A federal judge has set a June trial date for the U.S. government's long-running criminal case against Boeing for misleading regulators about the 737 MAX jet before 2 deadly crashes. Now, the judge didn't explain in his order why he decided to move the case to trial. Boeing and the Justice Department have spent months trying to renegotiate a plea agreement struck last year, which calls for Boeing to plead guilty to a single felony charge, the judge rejecting that deal in December. And robotaxis are coming to the nation's capital. Google's Waymo division adding Washington, D.C. to the expanding list of markets for its driverless taxis. Now, the service will launch sometime next year. For now, Waymo will continue to map Washington's streets with a safety driver behind the wheel. And the company is also aiming to add service in Miami next year, and it's teaming up with Uber to dispatch robotaxis in Atlanta later this year, guys.
I was just at South by Southwest where they kind of like launched the whole thing in Austin, and those were all over the streets. It was so weird to see.
Wow.
You're like,
yeah,
there's
I've
really
never
nobody
seen
driving.
I've never seen one in the streets. So
it's pretty crazy. All right, thanks, Savannah. Sure. Coming up, let's go to the movies. This summer blockbuster season shaping up to be a big one for the box office.
When we return, we're going to get a sneak peek at the films getting movie lovers excited. So get your popcorn, your morning popcorn, and come right back. This is Morning News Now.
Finally, this hour, spring may only have just started, but we're not too far away from the start of the summer blockbuster season, and there's plenty to look forward to this year for both audiences and theater owners.
A new survey by Fandango found 88% of moviegoers say they are planning to see more movies in theaters this year compared with 2024.
For more on this, let's bring in Eric Davis, managing editor of Fandango. That's part of our parent company, NBC Universal. Eric, good morning. Always great to have you with us and exciting to already get to talk about some summer movies, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, we want to ask, why do you think people are planning to go to the movies more this year?
I think there are a number of reasons. First of all, there's more movies to go see. There's more of a steady stream of films now that COVID and the Hollywood strikes are in the rearview mirror. We're seeing more of a variety and a steadiness more to movie theaters. Also, more technological advances, not just inside the movies, but also in the way that we watch them. 77% of people we surveyed said that premium large formats were a big decision maker. So that's like an IMAX movie or a Dolby or the 4DX where the seats shake. People love that. And also special events. You know, Taylor Swift and Beyonce made waves when they brought their concert tours to movie theaters. The Olympics screened in movie theaters last year. And so I think there's more of a variety of the types of content you can go watch in movie theaters.
I love the theaters where the seats shake and it sprays water in my face while I'm watching it.
Crazy.
It at least keeps me awake, if nothing else. So when it comes to the actual experience of the theater, what is it people are looking for?
Oh, yeah, people are looking for an escape and a form of relaxation, of course. You want to get out of the house. Also, you know, when we surveyed Gen Z, the number one factor for them was social gathering, like getting out of the house with your friends and family, also watching films with better picture and sound quality. But I also think the experience is a big major factor. You know, we're starting to see not just standalone movie theaters, we're starting to see them become entertainment centers. And these are movie theaters that have arcades in them and bowling alleys and coffee shops and, you know, photo booths and all kinds of different activities so that you can really make a night out of going to the movies.
It is so fun to go to those ones where you can like get dinner and like good nachos, not the kind with just like a little cup of cheese and a glass of wine. I love it. Eric, let's finally talk about the summer blockbusters. What are we looking forward to?
Yeah, well, so the top 10 most anticipated Jurassic World Rebirth, actually at the top. Never underestimate the power of dinosaurs at the box office. This is a new Jurassic World movie, stars Scarlett Johansson, Jonathan Bailey, as well as Mahershala Ali. And it looks great. That's number one. But also, you know, the superhero movies are in there. The Fantastic Four from Marvel. Mission Impossible, which I actually kind of think is a superhero movie. Might be the last one that Tom Cruise stars in. That's out. Superman, of course. Marvel has another film called Thunderbolts in early May. So, yeah, those big superhero action movies, of course, fronting the list. Lilo and Stitch, my kids can't wait to go see, as well as Freakier Friday on there 28 years later. There's a John Wick spinoff, Ballerina, starring Ana de Armas. That's also on the list, as well as How to Train Your Dragon, a live-action version of that also my kids are very excited to go watch.
Freakier Friday, I'm excited about.
That, a lot of people are excited about that one. So many generations there. So is this, I mean, we're seeing so many sequels and so many franchises, and that's become a staple of summer. Is this the studios playing it safe, and is there worry that they're playing it too safe? Because the box office numbers aren't great so far this year.
I definitely don't think it's playing it safe. I think this is familiar for us. We do see a lot of blockbusters and sequels and remakes. You know, that familiarity, I think, is the biggest draw for people. But also, I like to say there's plenty of original movies coming out, too. Look in between the blockbusters, and you'll find a lot of variety.
Eric Davis, we are so excited. What are you most excited about?
Oh, Mission Impossible. I'm a big dork for that franchise, so I can't wait for it.
There you go. I think I'm excited to see Scarlett Johansson in Jurassic
That will be
World.
good, because they need a better one after the last one.
Yeah.
So people are looking for redemption from the dinosaurs.
And I read an interview where she said she's like always wanted to be part of Jurassic World. You know, so pretty cool. All right, Eric Davis, great to see you. Happy watching. See you soon.
That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us, though. The news continues right now.
We're following breaking news this morning. The publication The Atlantic has published text from that Signal group chat after top Trump administration officials repeatedly said that no classified information was shared. A recap now. The group on the messaging app Signal inadvertently included the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg. Also on that chain, top government officials discussing an attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, in his initial report on the incident published Monday, Goldberg chose not to disclose what you're seeing on the screen right now, military operations shared in the group. But after multiple officials in the chat denied that classified information was shared, well, The Atlantic is responding, and this morning it's revealing more messages from the chat, which you just saw. Goldberg writes, as a general rule, we do not publish information about military operations if that information could possibly jeopardize the lives of U.S. personnel. The statements by Hegseth, Gabbard, Ratcliffe, and Trump, combined with the assertions made by numerous administration officials that we are lying about the context of the Signal texts, have led us to believe that people should see the texts in order to reach their own conclusions. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce. Dan, good morning. So we saw them scrolling across the screen there. What new information are we learning was sent in this group chat?
You know, Joe, this is reinforcing the original count that the Atlantic had of this text chain, and that is very specific details were shared about upcoming military strikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen. It involves discussion about specific fighter jet types, F-18s, that were going to be involved, F-16s. It talks about drones, specific drones, what time the air raids, the air operations were going to start. It even talks about one building being hit with a Houthi a senior figure believed to be in the building at the time. This is under any definition. If you talk to any national security official who served over the past 20 or 30 years, or a military officer, they'll tell you this is always considered secret. It's considered classified. And it's something that you don't want out because you don't want your adversaries to know what you're going to do, how you're going to attack them. You don't want to jeopardize your own forces. And you also don't want to give them insights into how your military is operating. It also, this group chat also, Joe, shows that indeed Michael Waltz, the national security advisor, or whoever was using his Signal app, invited Jeffrey Goldberg into this group chat, the journalist from The Atlantic. So that's also indisputable. So I think it puts the White House in a difficult position because it's kind of indisputable information that very sensitive material was being shared on this commercial app that is not a government-approved, officially government-sanctioned communications channel for classified information.
Dan, we should note the Trump National Security Team has said repeatedly that no classified information was shared on this chat and that the exchange did not include specific targeting locations. We've repeatedly heard Secretary Hegseth say no war plans were shared. Is this looking like a semantics argument about what we call this?
I think they're trying to turn it into that. But if you speak to anyone, again, who's served in the intelligence or the military, they'll tell you, communities, they'll tell you that this is, by any common sense definition, supposed to be secret, right? And of course, keep in mind the Espionage Act, which prohibits leaking state secrets, doesn't talk about classified information, it talks about national defense information. So throughout the national security apparatus, any information about upcoming military operations or possible military operations is considered highly secret, highly classified, because they don't want to jeopardize, again, and put people at risk in uniform or future operations. So, yes, they are trying to say something like this isn't a war plan. Well, experts will tell you that's sort of a distinction without a difference, right? Military operation, military plans, these are all basically the same thing.
And Dan, real quickly, how are officials in the Trump administration responding to this so far?
The first response out of the White House was to describe this as showing that that it's incorrect, to show that officials didn't share war plans, because the Atlantic referred to these, I guess, as military plans. And again, they're getting into this kind of semantic back and forth. But privately, Joe, in Congress, there are Republicans who privately are very unhappy about this and do believe that it was a mistake. And some of them publicly have said this was a mistake.
And we should know J.D. Vance has taken to Twitter. He says, quote, "It's very clear Goldberg oversold what he had." All right, Dan DeLuce, appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much. For more, let's bring in David Rode. He's an author, journalist, and senior executive editor for national security here at NBC News. David, good morning. We know the Trump administration has been downplaying this, saying no classified information was included in the messages. Now that we are getting our first look at these messages, does it appear this is more serious than they were admitting? How do you put all this into context right now?
It's certainly more detailed. And again, as Dan said, when you're possibly leaking the timing when aircraft, were going to be dropping their bombs, mentioning the type of aircraft, that's very dangerous. That puts potentially American pilots in danger. In the past, the Houthis, the group that was being bombed in Yemen, had shot down or jammed at least 10 American drones that were carrying out these kind of strikes. There's no public reporting that the Houthis have ever shot down a piloted American aircraft. But again, I guess common sense that when you say this is where this type of aircraft is going to attack and put in the exact time and the series of attacks, that is extremely dangerous for, I think, American armed services members. And it's important. And just one last thing to watch. The Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker of Minnesota, said very clearly yesterday he was going to investigate this. He was going to conduct a bipartisan investigation. So that's a critical sign that some Republican members of the Senate are very concerned about this, and their job is to oversight and the armed services to see the conduct of Pete Hegseth and of the U.S. military. So if that goes forward and Republican voices, grow expressing concerns, that's going to be a challenge for the administration.
We should note no locations were mentioned in the chat, but I think one thing that's really standing out, we had on the screen a moment ago at 14:15, it says strike drones on target, and then in parentheses, all caps. This is when the first bombs will definitely drop, then lower caps pending earlier trigger-based targets. You've been covering national security for a very, very long time, David. Have we seen anything like this before?
No, and I will, proudly, or for better and worse, talk about dating back to the war in Bosnia in the 1990s, which I covered when I was far younger. There were NATO airstrikes that played a major role in ending that conflict. None of this type of information would have ever been released. Just to know when the first bomb hits, even if you don't know where, you can prepare your air defenses for the attack. I mean, it's an incredibly valuable information to an adversary. So this is a major breach and a major risk that occurred, in terms of, again, putting American pilots possibly in harm's way.
All right, David Rode, appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Capitol Hill, senators pressed President Trump's pick to run the Social Security Administration yesterday about his plans to change the program. Many are worried about the program's future after Elon Musk called it a Ponzi scheme and said it was ripe for reform. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us with more on this. Ryan, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. President Trump has promised that not a single Social Security benefit will be impacted by his plans to overhaul the federal government. But even if he has no plans to cut direct benefits, Democrats are worried that dramatic changes to the system could make life difficult for millions of Americans who count on their Social Security check.
The future of Social Security in the spotlight as Frank Bisignano, President Trump's pick to run the Social Security program, promised he would not push to privatize the system.
I've never thought about privatizing. It's not a word that anybody's ever talked to me about.
The former CEO of a tech financial services company's testimony comes as the agency is in the crosshairs of a budget battle that could lead to dramatic reforms, spearheaded by Elon Musk, a noted critic of the program.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Republicans insist it's not benefits they are after.
Can you guarantee at this stage of the negotiations that no one's Social Security benefits will be impacted at the end of this?
We're going to be looking at where can we find savings that are associated with waste, fraud, and abuse.
Big staff reductions, branch closures, and a move to automation and artificial intelligence are all on the table. And that has some seniors like Ross Winklebauer nervous.
They want you to do everything online. And I'm a senior citizen.
I need my grandkids to come over and do a lot of stuff for me online.
Democrats accusing billionaire Republicans like Musk and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick of taking the benefits so many people rely on for granted.
Let's say Social Security didn't send out their checks this month. My mother-in-law, who's 94, she wouldn't call and complain.
Lutnick arguing only fraudsters complain about missing checks, a comment some benefit recipients argue is out of touch.
Most of us don't have that kind of a luxury, to just, we'll wait for the next security checks. People depend on that.
A 2024 poll shows that 72% of adults worry Social Security will run out of funding in their lifetime, money from a program they paid into and deserve.
It's not a handout. It's money that myself and other seniors paid into during our working years.
And there are already some signs that the reforms are having an impact. There are reports of the agency's website crashing and phone calls to the agency going unanswered. That led Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer yesterday to accuse the administration of sabotaging the system. Joe?
All right, Ryan, thank you.
Well, Ukraine and Russia are continuing to trade strikes this morning, one day after both sides agreed to a partial ceasefire. The White House said on Tuesday that both countries agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea and to implement a ban on attacks on energy infrastructure following negotiations that were mediated by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Now, despite these strides towards peace, both sides are reporting drone attacks this morning. NBC News international correspondent Kelly Kobiea joins us from London with more. Hey, Kelly, good morning. So let's start with the ceasefire agreement. What were the key terms here?
So details, Savannah, of that deal weren't released, but the White House did release two statements, one for Russia and one for Ukraine. Essentially, the deal would reopen key trade routes through the Black Sea. Both sides apparently agreeing to ensure safe navigation.
This is an NBC News special report.
Good morning. We are coming on the air with breaking news at the Supreme Court. The court upholding restrictions put in place by the Biden administration on so-called ghost guns. Those are kits that are used to make homemade weapons that are difficult to trace and have been used to get around background checks. They're often found online. They're easy to assemble. Now, this is a rare decision from this conservative Supreme Court upholding a tighter gun control law. Gun manufacturers had argued that the former president's team overstepped its regulatory powers. But this morning, the court said it had not. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett is with us on this. Laura, good morning. So maybe not such a surprise, given that a couple of years back, this court, just back in 2023, had kept this in place, had refused to block these restrictions while litigation continued. What's your big takeaway?
It's interesting. This is a split decision, but not by that much. In other words, it's not a 5-4 like we've seen on some high-profile gun cases. Instead, it's 7-2, with at least some of the conservatives joining the more liberal camp. And we should know it's a case about guns, but it's not a case about squarely the Second Amendment in the way that we typically think about it. It's really a case about the technical definition of a firearm, whether the ATF had the administration to regulate these kits. As you mentioned, they make they're untraceable, which means they can be on the black market, which is why the Biden administration had targeted them. It's also a kit that had been used by Luigi Mangion, the suspected killer for the United Healthcare CEO. So it's gotten a lot of high-profile attention recently. But again, it's really a technical case about whether it meets the definition of the firearm. And because it does, the Supreme Court saying today that the regulation can be upheld for now.
And so those restrictions put in place, they had been in place while this was being litigated. So in practice, does anything change?
On the ground, no. But obviously, gun rights owners had wanted to try to get this overturned in order to expand their rights. But at least, again, for now, it doesn't mean that down the line something could change. But at least for now, they will stay illegal.
Yeah, and broader implications if something like this is brought again.
Yeah, and they could be. But again, this is just about the ability to regulate them on the market as opposed to the broader right to a firearm, which was not at issue in this case.
Which could maybe be different with this conservative Supreme Court.
Exactly. And more cases down the line to come, obviously.
Laura Jarrett, thank you very much. Yeah. And that concludes this NBC News special report. I'm Savannah Sellers. We'll return most of you to the Today Show now.
William Taylor. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Good to have you with us, Ambassador. I mean, given your experience in Ukraine, just how big of a deal is this ceasefire agreement right now?
Well, Joe, as you've pointed out, there are smaller ceasefire agreements. There's no big ceasefire agreement. Actually, President Trump had proposed a big ceasefire agreement that would include the land and the sea and the air. And President Zelensky agreed with that. President Trump, as you say, took it to President Putin, who said no. And President Putin said, no, we'll just do these smaller ones. So that's what they're looking at now, even though President Trump and President Zelensky had gone for a more ambitious one. So these smaller ones have not, as Kelly just reported, have not been specified. The implementation of how these would work, how they'd be enforced, when they start, have not been specified. So there's a lot going on that is still to be done.
Ambassador, explain the challenges here about ensuring that the ceasefire holds, enforcing it at all, that both sides here implement what they've agreed to.
Savannah, it's a very good question. The right question is, what are the challenges? And the main challenge, frankly, is Russia. So even this Black Sea deal, which had been in effect earlier and the Russians pulled out of it, but now they've agreed back to it. But they've now said, oh, well, there are some other things that we need before we can go into effect. The Ukrainians have said, fine, let's put it into effect right now. The Russians have come back and said, well, actually, we need sanctions removed. Well, that wasn't discussed, at least not in any explicit way. So the Russians, again, are playing for time, are dragging it out. The main challenge for implementation is clearly be on the Russian side.
Ambassador, having mediators like the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, is that working? Does that seem right now to be the best approach to bring everyone together?
Joe, I think it probably is. It's not clear that there's any other way to get the Ukrainians and the Russians to sit down and have a conversation face to face. And it is true that President Trump has brought both people to the table. President Putin and President Zelensky are having conversations. And so that is a good thing, or it could be a good thing if it results in an agreement that is good for the United States, that is good for Ukraine, that is good for Europe, and that recognizes who the aggressor has been. And if that is possible, then this could be a good thing.
All right, Ambassador William Taylor, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Savannah.
New details are emerging in the case of Luigi Mangion, the 26-year-old accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. In a new court filing, his attorneys are asking a judge to grant him access to a laptop while he's in federal custody. They say he needs it to review discovery materials.
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us with the latest. Hi, Sam. Good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. It's not just open access to a laptop. There are specific conditions here. In that filing, Mangione's attorney said the laptop would not be for communicating or entertainment, no internet, but so that he can review, as you suggested, thousands of pages of legal documents prepared by the prosecution. They also want to know why other inmates at the prison do have limited use of a laptop, but potentially not Mangione. It's part of a wave of claims they're making about ensuring a fair trial.
Roughly a month since we last saw Luigi Mangione in a New York state court, his defense is now requesting access to a laptop for the 26-year-old while he remains locked up in federal custody. In a motion filed last week, his attorney requested a specially formulated device given the, quote, volume of discovery, which includes 3 terabytes of data filled with photos and thousands of hours of video, arguing there are not enough visiting hours to review the case with Mangione.
The defense makes a good point. Mangione's case in particular has a ton of video and photographic evidence.
According to the court filing, federal prosecutors did not object to the request, but the Manhattan DA's office did due to the, quote, sensitive nature of the documents. Mangione's high-powered attorney, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, has consistently argued her client, who has pleaded not guilty, has not been treated fairly.
Luigi's right to a fair trial is being infringed upon because he is being publicly treated as guilty.
In that filing, Agnifilo also accusing the state prosecution of withholding discovery, including grand jury witness testimony and seized electronic devices. Although legal experts say that's not an uncommon strategy. Mangione's attorneys also slamming public statements and video interviews made by New York City Mayor Eric Adams, among others, in a recent Max documentary.
We're seeing the radicalization of our young people. We're seeing our young people believing that the answer to a problem is by using violence.
to a New York Magazine profile of the police commissioner, quoted as saying while looking at possible suspect photos, that jawline is not chiseled enough. Those eyebrows are not wild enough. All this as financial support picks up steam for the Ivy League grad, charged with murder in the act of terrorism.
We, the people, want Luigi free.
Whose online defense fund has now topped more than $750,000.
That includes $36,000 for one donation recently in a day. Mangion's lawyer in Pennsylvania also filing a motion earlier this month requesting the charges there be dismissed and any evidence, including DNA, suppressed, arguing that actions taken by Altoona police in Pennsylvania before and during Mangion's detention were unlawful. Meantime, NBC News has reached out to the Manhattan DA's office here, who said they do plan on responding to his latest motion in court papers about trying to get that laptop, though it's unclear when that might actually be coming out. The next federal hearing is scheduled for April the 18th, so stay tuned.
All right, Sam, thank you so much. A storm in the Pacific Northwest could bring hail, heavy rain, and damaging winds to the region. Let's get a closer look now with your morning News Now weather.
Michelle Grossman's here. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. And this is really rare. We could even see a brief tornado in spots in the Pacific Northwest. So this is going to be a 2-day type of deal. Today, we have a big cyclone that moves on shore. That's going to bring some rain, some wind, some snow, and the chance for severe storms. Again, we're going to see hail, winds really gusty as well. And it's going to continue tomorrow in terms of the heavy rain. The severe threat should be over by tomorrow. But we're going to look at localized flooding in western Oregon, also in Washington. And then that rain and mountain snow will reach portions of California. So where you see the blue, that's where the snow will fall. And we're looking at heavy rain. Those are the brighter colors, and that's going to be mainly confined to the coast, especially of Washington and Oregon. But take a look at this. 7 million people at risk from Seattle to Portland to Eugene for the chance of severe thunderstorms. With that, we could see 2-inch hail. We could see damaging winds of 60 miles per hour. And we will be watching as we go throughout the later part of today for a brief tornado or two. Heavy rainfall, that's going to be an issue as well from Seattle to Eugene to Eureka, especially along the coast, and that extends into portions of Northern California. Could see over 8 inches of snow in some spots. So that's where you see the pinks and purples on the mountains, and that will be the highest peaks of those mountains. That's one big weather story. Another one we're going to be watching not only today, but Thursday and also Friday. A developing system in the portions of southern Texas. It's a subtropical moisture that's moving on shore. It's going to bring the chance of really heavy rain. And when I say heavy rain, I mean 2 to 3 inches per hour, and could see 15 inches of rain in some spots. The bullseye will be right around Corpus Christi. So flood watches have already been issued, and not much happening right now. This is a look at radar. You can see it's pretty dry, but this will be filling in as we go throughout the later part of today, especially this evening and especially on Thursday. This is a setup, that Gulf moisture streaming onshore, lots of bright colors showing us that we're going to see heavy rain, and it's going to stay in place over the same areas for days to come. So again, Corpus Christi right around there will be the bullseye for this, right along the coast there in portions of southern Texas. Hourly rainfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. Generally, where you see those darker colors, we're going to see 4, 8 inches of rain, but we could locally see 10 to 15 inches in some spots. So those are the two big weather stories. Again, we're watching those record highs throughout the west into the southern plains. Big area of high pressure bringing in that southerly flow. So temperatures into the 80s and 90s, 90 degrees today in Tucson. That is 12 degrees above what is typical for this time of year, and 91 in Henderson. Back to you guys.
Congrats to everyone doing spring break out there. They did it right. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. There's much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now. A little later, we'll dig into a pretty eye-opening new report on just how well America's infrastructure is holding up 1 year after the collapse of Baltimore's Key Bridge.
First, after the break, Amanda Knox back in the public eye this morning with a new memoir on her years spent in an Italian prison and her life nearly 2 decades after that murder trial that captivated the world. She joins us next. Amanda Knox back in the public eye this morning with a new memoir on...
We're back with a look inside Amanda Knox's new memoir. It's about her experience in an Italian prison and then life after being exonerated for murder. Now, it was nearly 2 decades ago that Knox and her former boyfriend were accused of killing her study abroad roommate Meredith Kircher in Italy.
The two were convicted following a highly publicized trial in 2009. Their convictions were then overturned on appeal 2 years later. They were retried and reconvicted before the convictions were ultimately tossed out in 2015 after Italy's highest court found stunning flaws in the investigation.
Amanda Knox joins us here now in studio. Her new book, it's called Free, My Search for Meaning, is what we're here to discuss. Amanda, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So I want to talk a little bit about that title and kind of what you take on in this book, because some people may have read a book that you also put out prior that was called Waiting to Be Heard. And now you have this where you're specifically, as you say it, looking at my search for meaning.
Yes. So for those who have read Waiting to Be Heard, they know that it is a very, very different book than Free, because Waiting to Be Heard was written at a time of my life when I was still on trial. I had just freshly gotten out of prison, and I was noticing that there was this crazy narrative out there in the world about me, and I really wanted to set the record straight, and that was the goal of Waiting to Be Heard, and I'm really proud of that book. But Free is a very, very different book. It's not a book that is a reaction to some false narrative about me. It's really a story of what happens on the other side of trauma. How do we incorporate our pain into our identity? And how do we unravel all of the different layers of pain through time? It's like the idea of freedom is something that I have meditated on quite a bit. And when I was in prison, all I wanted was to go back to my life in freedom. But then I discovered coming home that my life no longer existed. I was forever branded the girl accused of murder, and I did not feel free. So the story that I tell in this book is the journey of discovering and creating my own sense of freedom, regardless of the circumstances that are external to me.
In 2011, when you were set free and you returned to Seattle, I was a reporter in Seattle. I just told you, I was at the airport when you were there, and I was certainly not alone. And you talk about how even after that time, it still felt like you were in a prison cell, right? I mean, talk about what you were going through even after you were set free.
Yeah, well, I came off of an airplane. I immediately was struck by the sights and smells of my home that I had been, taken away from for so long. And then I was immediately put into the spotlight in a way that I was a little bit protected by from the prison. And I remained I remained under a sort of scrutiny for the rest of my adult life, really, because once you are accused of a crime, you are stigmatized, and you are, even if you can prove like your innocence, as I did in my case, there was this ongoing sense of, who am I? Now that I've gone through this, what does this mean? What can I possibly do in my life that will come to define me that is not this horrible thing that happened to me that I didn't do? And I think a lot of people who have been through a wrongful conviction experience have that same dilemma. What could I possibly do with my life after I have fought this? But I think it's even more than just a wrongful conviction story, because I think we all, at a certain point of our lives, have a moment of realization where you're like, oh my God, am I trapped in this? Is this what I was building? Is this what my life is for? Am I even the protagonist of my own life, or am I just a pawn in someone else's game? These are things that I've had to unpack in my own life, which has had its sort of extreme version of it. But I have found a lot of satisfaction and connection with others in finding how what I went through relates to other people's experiences.
One of the things that you detail in here is sort of this group of women who have been through similar experiences in the cultural narrative, meeting Monica Lewinsky, for example, and also women who would just, I think you said, even like to your face, come up to you and apologize for the way that they felt about you, spoke about you while this was going on. What have those experiences been like?
Well, I can just start by saying that Monica was texting me this morning, just like rooting for me and just being so sweet and checking in on me. So she's very much big sistering me through the entire experience of reclaiming my narrative. And as you know, she has her new podcast, Reclaiming. So she's very much like championing women to reclaim their narratives. And I think a thing that I was really surprised that I've not really noticed anyone focusing on, or at least examining when it came to my case, but also in cases like Monica's, is the narrative that was being sold to us, that was pitched and packaged by the prosecution in my case and in the media, was this idea that women hate women. And they are constantly in sexual competition with each other. It is a male fantasy that does not exist, but it comes to, it's a way that we use to define women and to vilify them and to diminish them and to make them irrelevant. And I think that has happened to me, that has happened to Monica, that has happened to countless women. And I think it's really important that women talk about that and do not buy into it. And then, of course, when someone comes to me and says, oh my God, I just realized that I was consuming the worst experience of your life as entertainment, and I bought into that without question. I am so sorry. Like, I find that people who like that are more common to like recognizing and taking accountability than law enforcement, which is unfortunate because it's ironic because people who are empowered to hold other people to account very often do not want to hold themselves to account.
You mentioned law enforcement, and we only have a few seconds, so we can't get into the full story. But so much of your book is about the fact that you formed this surprising connection with the prosecutor in this case. Just describe what that has meant to you and where that's at right now.
Yes. So he also texted me this morning.
Wow.
Yeah. So yes, we are very close now. We talk to each other on a regular basis, and it's a really important thing to me that we discovered each other outside of the adversarial system that we encountered each other first. And I really wanted to give him the opportunity to be a human being, the flawed but also well-meaning human being that he is, which was not initially what he was able to offer me. And I think that he was really stunned by my generosity of spirit that way. And I think in a way, I proved to him who I was in a way that I never could in the courtroom.
Wow. Amanda Knox, fascinating to talk to you, fascinating to read this book, My Search for Meaning Free. It is out. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
All right, coming up, the latest on the health of Pope Francis as he continues his recovery from a severe case of pneumonia.
After the break, why the Pontiff's medical team nearly opted to stop treatment when he was at his worst. It's up next.
We're back now with some pretty dramatic new details about Pope Francis's hospitalization.
Yeah, apparently the 88-year-old pontiff was in such serious condition during this recent hospitalization that doctors considered stopping treatment. For more, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin, who has the details. Hey, Erin, good morning.
Hey, guys, good morning. For the first time, the Pope's top doctor is speaking out, releasing harrowing details of the pontiff's time in the hospital. He told an Italian newspaper his condition was so severe, they had to decide whether to continue treatment or to let Pope Francis go. He says they never gave up.
This morning, shocking new details about the Pope's 38-day battle with pneumonia. The pontiff, now recovered, waving to relieved well-wishers from a hospital window on Sunday. But doctors revealing the 88-year-old had reportedly been so close to death, they considered stopping treatment. For the first time, those around him had tears in their eyes, said Dr. Sergio Alfieri in an interview with Italy's La Corriere della Sera newspaper. The physician adding, "We had to choose whether to stop and let him go or push forward and try everything." The crisis played out late last month after the Pope nearly choked on his vomit, Alfieri told the newspaper. He had been admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital 2 weeks earlier for bronchitis. It was the Pope's nurse, Massimiliano Strappetti, who told the medical team to keep going. Try everything. Don't give up, Strappetti said, according to Alfieri. It was the worst health crisis of the Pope's 12-year papacy. But on Sunday, he was discharged. Alfieri calling his recovery a miracle. The pontiff even offering his medical team pizza.
His doctors have said he will require a further 2 months of rest to recuperate and to recover, as he's 88 years old.
Now back at the Vatican, it's unclear how much he'll be seen in public. His engagements postponed, including a meeting with Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla. The royals sending their best wishes for his recovery.
In the article, Dr. Alfieri says the Pope's recovery is like a miracle and points to the power of prayer. Now, in terms of those public appearances for the next 2 months, the Pope has been advised to limit contact with groups and children in order to avoid risking new infection, but also adding Pope Francis dictates what he's going to do.
He's the boss.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate
just
it.
Amazing. All right, let's stay on international news. A Palestinian Oscar winner allegedly attacked and arrested by Israeli authorities before being released is now speaking out.
NBC's Matt Bodner is following that developing news and other headlines from around the world. Matt, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. Hamdan Bilal was detained on Monday following what he described as an attack by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Speaking to the Associated Press today, Bilal said a settler kicked his head, quote, like a football. Soldiers then detained him and 2 other Palestinians. He was kept blindfolded for 20 hours while soldiers routinely kicked, punched, or beat him with a stick. He does not speak Hebrew, but he said he heard them say his name and then the word Oscar. The IDF has not yet responded to a request for comment from the Associated Press. Moving along now to South Korea, at least 24 people have been killed in what has been described as the nation's worst ever wildfires. There are multiple fires burning now across the southeastern part of South Korea. Authorities say that most of the victims of the fires are in their 60s and 70s, and an additional 26 people have been injured. 12 of them are reported to be in critical condition. The fires have so far forced more than 23,000 people to flee their homes. In addition to lives lost, the fires have devastated a 1,300-year-old Buddhist temple. The night before, a number of cultural relics were removed and transported to safer areas. We'll wrap up this hour with Prince Harry. The royal in self-imposed exile has been forced to step down as patron of a charity that he set up in 2006 in honor of his mother, the late Princess Diana. The charity is called Senta Ball, and its mission is aimed at helping children in southern Africa, particularly those diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. His stepping down follows a dispute with the charity's chairwoman and its board of trustees. The details are still unclear, but Harry says that he is, quote, in shock to have to resign. Back to you guys.
All right, Matt, thank you. Coming up, America's infrastructure is back in focus this morning as we mark 1 year since the tragic collapse of Baltimore's Key Bridge.
Are the nation's busiest roads and bridges any safer in the months after that unthinkable disaster? We're going to dig into an eye-opening new report. That's next.
Welcome back. This morning marks 1 year since that deadly collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore.
Officials are joining the community in remembering the 6 people who died in that tragedy. The National Transportation Safety Board is still investigating after the crew of that massive cargo ship says it lost the ability to steer once power was lost. Yesterday, Maryland Governor Wes Moore reflected on the moment.
This was a moment where our state and our city really stepped up collectively together and wrapped our arms around each other, because that's exactly what this crisis demanded.
NBC News reporter Julia Jester is at the scene in Baltimore with more. Hey, Julia, good morning. So I know you have some exclusive reporting actually about a tour that officials took with the families of the victims yesterday. What did you see?
That's right, Savannah. I was able to go out on a boat with Governor Moore and Mayor Scott with around a dozen family members of the victims. Now, they did not want to do interviews or be identified due to sensitivity around immigration right now. The families of these victims who are from El Salvador, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and the immigrant community here is so closely knit. And so to see the moment where many of these family members went out on the water for the first time for many of them, to see the site where their loved ones were last alive was emotional and touching. And when they laid out these wreaths in the water, you could sense a moment of release. On the way back, young children of the victims were laughing with the governor, and it was a little more lighter, having had a bit of that closure. I spoke with Mayor Scott about how he felt going out on the water with those families. Here's what he told me.
It was heavy. Heavy because I'm not out there alone. Heavy because we're talking about families who are going out there on a year anniversary of the day, the last time that they saw their loved one. A year to the day, the last time they told their loved one that they loved them. Right? That's a heavy thing.
Now, the families are still seeking justice among a court case against the owners of the Dolly. The state of Maryland also has pending litigation to try to seek justice in this unthinkable tragedy. Savannah?
Julia, we know Baltimore is one of the busiest cargo ports in the country. Talk about how much this collapse has impacted the industry and the traffic going through there, which really has a domino effect across the country.
It absolutely had ripple effects, but due to a lot of measures implemented by the state and nation, it has been able to bounce back. Last year, the Port of Baltimore handled around 45 million tons of international cargo at $62 billion. That was one of their best years yet. And so despite the disruption of the bridge collapse, being able to clear the channel much more quickly than officials anticipated allowed that activity to come back to the port. But for the workers, it still has been slow going. I spoke with some longshoremen who are back to work, but they're still getting back in the swing of things. And a lot of the economic aid that came into this area really prevented an economic disaster. The Small Business Administration, for example, gave out around $126 million in loans, and that doesn't even include the state aid. And so with all of those benefits to the local community, they've been able to stay afloat. But as you mentioned, it's not just the businesses and the port. It also involves really increased commute times for these communities without the bridge that was a connector from different parts of the city and the state. So it remains to be seen the long-term lasting effects, but folks are optimistic that with renewed focus on this area, that positive changes can happen. Savannah, Joe.
All right, Julia Jester, thank you very much for joining us on this.
Now, that anniversary comes just as the American Society of Civil Engineers is releasing its latest report card on America's infrastructure. This comes out every 4 years, rating the nation on 18 different categories, from schools to aviation to solid waste and energy.
Yeah, so what kind of report is it? Well, nearly half of the assessed categories improved this year. That helped raise the overall grade of infrastructure in the U.S. from a C- to a C.
All right. For more on this, let's bring in Anna Tiarino-Esquino. She is a member of the ASCE Committee on America's Infrastructure. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, just describe what types of infrastructure are measured in this report card and how they're chosen.
Yeah, so we try and measure a pretty holistic picture of the infrastructure of our nation. So it includes the things that you see every day, like wastewater, drinking water, stormwater, roads, bridges, transit. And it also includes things like ports, inland waterways, energy, perhaps some of those infrastructure categories that go appreciated but less seen.
Anna, I mean, these years, the grade ranges from a B in ports to a D in stormwater and transit. I mean, I grew up in a strict household, but even a B was a little bit of an issue. So hearing some of these, I think, is kind of surprising to people. What stood out to you about these findings and areas that really need improvement?
You know, as a person working as a civil engineer, I see these infrastructure systems all the time. So we tend to know how they operate, or sometimes if they're not operating well enough. But I do want, you know, the general American society to be shocked, because I'm not necessarily proud to bring a C home to my parents. It's not the grades that I would strive for, and it's not the grade of the infrastructure that I rely on as a person living here. So not entirely surprising to me as someone that works in it, but I do want everyone to be aware, yeah, we're at a C level. That is an improvement. C is actually the highest grade we've given out in this report since we've been doing it. Wow. So we are seeing improvement, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, and another thing that's noteworthy, for the first time since 1998, none of the categories got a D-, so that's good. I mean, we've heard a lot about how there's this need for improvements in our nation's infrastructure over the last few years. Talk about the recent federal investments passed under the Biden administration, and are those helping with these efforts? Are you already seeing a change because of that?
Absolutely. I actually think that the increase in the grades was largely because of the federal investment. I mean, federal investment pays off. And this is, of course, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but also some of the other laws that were passed, like the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. All of those gave money to our agencies that manage our infrastructure. So that money is already out there funding bridge replacements, funding road improvements, and also giving money to our water and wastewater so that we can alleviate some of the pressure on our ratepayers.
Anna, the report card does also talk a lot about building for the future. What are the most important things that your committee thinks needs to happen before your next report?
Yeah, so we really want to see sustained investment that focuses on resilience. Civil infrastructure lasts for a really long time, and we need it to last for a really long time. So we need to be thinking about not only the infrastructure that we need today, but the infrastructure that we're going to need 50 years from now. So we're looking both at meeting the conditions and the needs of today's society and making sure that our kids have a good infrastructure that they can build their lives upon.
Do you think we can get to a C+ in 4 years?
Well, it really will depend on whether we can get sustained federal investment. The sustaining part is really important. I mean, as an individual, I budget, and I can't imagine not being able to decide whether I can afford something if I don't know if I'm going to get a next paycheck. So that sustained funding is really important, and hopefully sustained and increasing. Because of course we want to get from a C to a B. I would love to see America really lead in the world of infrastructure. So maybe we can even reach for an A one day.
All right. Ana Tiarina Esquino, thank you for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Now let's get you some financial headlines. We've got new details on Apple's highly anticipated annual developers conference coming up in June.
Yeah, CNBC's Savannah Hanau is here with that and some other money news. Savannah, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Savannah. Good morning. That is right. Apple has scheduled its annual Worldwide Developers Conference for the week of June 9th. So get ready. It is expected that the company will focus on upcoming versions of software for the iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, and Apple TV. Now, Apple reportedly has some major visual design changes in store, and the conference could also see the debut of new hardware, such as a refreshed Mac Pro and the second-generation AirTags. It's also possible we could get an update on the AI features for Siri that have been delayed. Amazon is testing new AI shopping and health assistants. Now, a spokesperson confirming to CNBC the features are being tested with a limited number of customers. Now, the shopping tool called Interests AI. So this prompts users to describe an interest using your own words, and then it generates a custom list of products. A health AI chatbot can answer health and wellness questions, suggest products, and provide care options. And you can now use AI to see who your kids are talking to online. Character AI is adding a new parental insights feature, letting teens send a weekly report of their chatbot usage to a parent's email address. Now, this includes the average time spent across web and mobile each day, now who users mostly frequently interact with, and how much time they spend talking to each bot. And it's part of a series of updates to address concerns about minors spending too much time with chatbots and encountering inappropriate content, guys.
A lot of tools like this out there right now to help parents out using AI. Thanks, Savannah. Appreciate it.
You got it. Sure.
Coming up, you could call it unbridled joy.
After the break, the furry friends who are making all the difference in the lives of one group of California seniors with a little Hollywood help. Stay with us. That's next. Welcome back. Finally this hour, Hollywood actress Daryl Hannah is on a new mission to bring joy to those who need it.
And she's getting some help from a couple of furry friends. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson brings us their story.
All right, guys.
If unbridled joy had its own distinct rhythm, folks here might say it sounds something like this.
You're cute.
Meet Ziggy and Romeo. By far, this pair of mini horses are the two biggest stars ever to trot through Senior Concerns Adult Daycare, offering plenty of pets and lots of unconditional love.
You are my best friend.
And folks here aren't afraid to admit they need it.
This is fantastic for me.
Truth is, many come to the daycare suffering from the maladies of a lifelong march. Things like Alzheimer's and dementia, where loneliness only makes things worse.
Social isolation for older adults is incredibly damaging. We see amazing benefits to socialization for people with dementia.
That's your friend.
And if that cowgirl handler looks a little familiar, that's because it's actress Daryl Hannah, completely off script, cast in a role she's come to adore, caregiver.
It's really moving. Like, I actually, the first couple of times we came, I just was in tears because some of the people actually cried. People had their memories come back to them. They talk about when they had horses in World War II, or they had a mule when they were a little boy.
Daryl has been coming to the daycare for nearly a year now.
They just told us today, they're like, this is the highlight of everyone's month when you come here. It's so
that must
beautiful.
Feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's great.
Folks like Mike say these are the best days.
You're playing with the animals and your mind is going. You're smiling. You're having a good day.
Showing up, sharing love.
Yeah. Give me a kiss.
Sometimes the best care is the simple act of being there.
Oh, look, he's smiling.
Steve Patterson, NBC News, Thousand Oaks, California.
Nothing like a horse hug and a horse kiss.
She said, look, he's smiling at me. Thought he was.
That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us, though. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.